The first time he accused me of cheating, we were sitting at the kitchen table. The smell of burnt coffee still hung in the air. The winter sun barely reached through the blinds, leaving long gray shadows across the counter. My husband leaned back in his chair with a small, satisfied smile like he had just solved a puzzle. "So," he said slowly, tapping his phone against the table, "who is he?" I looked at him for a moment without answering. Outside, a delivery truck passed by, its engine rumbling softly down the street. Somewhere in the house, the heater clicked on. "I don't know what you mean," I said calmly. He laughed. Not a nervous laugh. A confident one. "You're not as clever as you think," he added. "I've seen the signs." And that was the moment something inside me became very clear. Because the man accusing me of cheating had been cheating on me for months. But instead of confronting him, arguing, or defending myself, I did something else. I let him believe he was right. Have you ever watched someone dig their own hole without realizing you handed them the shovel? I didn't argue that morning. I didn't defend myself. I simply stood up, rinsed my coffee cup in the sink, and walked out of the kitchen. Because by then, I had already started planning my exit. Looking back now, I can see the moment everything really began. Not the accusation at the kitchen table. Earlier, months earlier. It was a Thursday evening in late September, the kind of night where the air outside smells like cold leaves and the sun disappears earlier than it should. I was standing at the stove, stirring soup while the radio played quietly in the background. My husband, Daniel, was sitting on the couch scrolling through his phone. At least that's what I thought he was doing. Every few seconds, his screen lit up with new messages. The light flickered across his face in the dim living room. He smiled at the screen. Not a normal smile. A private one. Have you ever seen someone smile at their phone and immediately felt something shift inside your chest? At the time, I told myself I was imagining things. Marriages go through quiet phases, busy weeks, distant moods. That's what I believed. Or maybe that's what I wanted to believe. Later that night, Daniel went to shower. His phone stayed on the coffee table beside me. The screen lit up again. One new message. I wasn't trying to look. But the preview appeared before I could stop myself. "Miss you already." No name. Just a heart emoji. For a few seconds, I sat there staring at the message while the shower ran upstairs. Steam filled the bathroom above me. Water hit tile in a steady rhythm. I didn't open the phone. I didn't confront him. Instead, I placed the device exactly where it had been and went back to the kitchen. Because something about that moment felt fragile. Like touching it too quickly would break whatever truth was hiding underneath. Over the next few weeks, the small signs started stacking up. Late nights at the office. New passwords on his phone. Cologne he never used before. Conversations that stopped the second I walked into the room. Have you ever felt the quiet certainty that something is wrong long before you can prove it? I didn't ask questions. I watched. And the more I watched, the clearer the pattern became. Daniel wasn't just distant. He was careful. Careful in the way people are when they believe they're getting away with something. But what he didn't realize was that while he was busy hiding his secrets, I was slowly learning exactly who I had married. And once you truly see someone, you can't unsee them. By October, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. Daniel started coming home later and later. At first, it was small things. A meeting that ran long drinks with coworkers. Traffic delays that didn't quite make sense. I listened. I nodded. I didn't argue. Have you ever noticed how the truth begins to reveal itself when you stop interrupting the lies? One evening he walked in almost an hour after midnight. The house was dark except for the small lamp beside the couch where I sat reading. He looked surprised to see me awake. "You're still up?" he asked, loosening his tie. "I couldn't sleep," I replied. He walked past me quickly, heading for the kitchen. "I had a late project at work." I didn't respond. Instead, I turned another page in my book. But the smell reached me a moment later. Perfume. Not mine. Not anything I owned. Something soft and floral. Daniel must have noticed the way I glanced up. He froze for half a second, then opened the refrigerator like nothing was wrong. Have you ever watched someone try to act normal while their entire body is betraying them? That was the moment the last piece of doubt disappeared. Still, I said nothing. The next few weeks became a quiet routine of observation. He began guarding his phone more carefully. If a message came in, he turned the screen away from me. When he took calls, he stepped outside. Sometimes he smiled at the screen again. That same private smile I had seen before. And strangely, the more obvious his behavior became, the calmer I felt. Because once you understand what someone is doing, the confusion disappears. It becomes a puzzle. One night in early November, he came home carrying a small wrapped gift. "For you," he said. I looked at the box. "Why?" He laughed awkwardly. "Do I need a reason to buy my wife something?" Inside was a necklace. Delicate. Beautiful, and completely unfamiliar to his usual taste. I thanked him and put it on. But something about the moment felt strange. Almost rehearsed. As if the gift wasn't meant to make me happy but to make him feel less guilty. Have you ever received an apology that was disguised as generosity? That night, after he fell asleep, I sat in the living room staring at the necklace resting in my palm. And for the first time, I stopped thinking about whether he was cheating. Instead, I began wondering something else entirely. What would happen if I simply let him believe I didn't know? At first, I told myself I was just being patient. Maybe he would stop. Maybe whatever this was would fade away on its own. But by mid-November, patience had turned into clarity. Daniel stopped pretending to hide things very well. Late nights became normal. Weekend work trips started appearing on the calendar. And every time he left, he looked almost relieved. Like the house itself had become something he needed a break from. Have you ever watched someone slowly check out of a life they once helped build? The strange part was that the calmer I became, the more suspicious he grew. One night he came home early and found me sitting on the couch, texting. He stopped in the doorway and watched me. "Who are you talking to?" he asked. His tone sounded casual. But his eyes weren't. I glanced up. "Just a friend." He stepped closer. "What friend?" I shrugged slightly. "Someone from work." He stared at my phone for a moment longer than necessary. Then he nodded and walked away. But I noticed something important in that moment. For the first time, Daniel looked uncomfortable. Not guilty. Not ashamed. Just uneasy. Like a man who had suddenly realized the rules of a game might be changing. Over the next few days, I leaned into that feeling. Nothing dramatic. No flirting in front of him. No secret calls. Just small shifts. More time on my phone. More quiet smiles at messages. Occasionally stepping outside to answer a call. Have you ever watched someone panic when they think they're losing control of the situation? Daniel noticed. Of course he noticed. The tension between us grew thicker each day. And then one morning at the kitchen table he finally said it. "So," he asked, slowly, tapping his phone against the wood surface, "who is he?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke. For a second, I thought about telling him the truth. That I knew about the late nights. The perfume. The messages. But instead I did something much simpler. I didn't deny it. I didn't confirm it either. I just smiled faintly and stood up from the table. Because the moment Daniel believed I might be cheating, the entire balance of our marriage quietly shifted. And from that moment on, he had no idea he was walking directly into a plan I had already started building. The strange thing about suspicion is how quickly it grows. Once Daniel believed I might be seeing someone else, he couldn't stop looking for proof. Every small detail suddenly meant something to him. If I stepped outside to take a call, he noticed. If I smiled at a message, he noticed. If I left the room with my phone in my hand, he noticed that too. Have you ever watched someone become obsessed with a possibility they created themselves? At first, he tried to act confident about it. One evening, he leaned against the kitchen counter and said casually, "You know, people usually get sloppy when they're hiding something." I didn't respond. I simply stirred the pasta on the stove and let the silence sit between us. A few seconds later, he added, "Eventually the truth comes out." I glanced at him briefly. "You might be right." That answer seemed to bother him more than any argument would have. Because Daniel expected one of two reactions. Denial. Panic. Instead, he got calm. Over the next few weeks, his behavior changed in ways I hadn't expected. He started coming home earlier, watching me more carefully, sometimes asking random questions about my schedule, other times pretending everything was normal. But underneath it all, there was tension. The kind of tension that builds when someone believes they're losing control of a situation. Meanwhile, I quietly continued preparing for something much bigger. Documents were organized. Bank accounts were reviewed. Important files were copied and stored safely. Nothing dramatic. Just careful steps. Have you ever realized you were emotionally leaving a relationship long before you physically walked out the door? By early December, Daniel's suspicion had fully taken hold. One night he asked directly, "So when do you see him?" I looked up from my book. "Who?" "The guy you're texting," and I closed the book slowly. "You're the one who thinks he exists." Daniel studied my face for a long moment. Then he laughed. Not a happy laugh. More like the sound of someone trying to convince themselves they were still winning. But the truth was something he couldn't see yet. Because while he was busy imagining another man in my life, he completely missed what I was actually doing. I wasn't cheating. I was preparing to disappear. December arrived quietly. Outside, the neighborhood began filling with Christmas lights. Houses glowed red and gold at night, and the smell of pine trees drifted through grocery stores and sidewalks. Inside our home, things felt colder. Daniel had stopped asking direct questions, but the suspicion never left his eyes. Every time my phone lit up, he looked. Every time I stepped outside, he listened for how long I stayed there. Have you ever noticed how exhausting it becomes to live inside someone else's assumptions? Meanwhile, my preparations continued. I didn't rush anything. Important documents were already saved. My personal savings account had been separated weeks earlier. A small apartment across town had quietly been secured. Daniel never noticed. Because the entire time he was focused on the wrong story. One evening, about a week before Christmas, he sat across from me at dinner and studied my face carefully. "You've been different lately," he said. I set my fork down. "How?" "Distant," he replied. I nodded slowly. "Maybe." He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "You know, if you're seeing someone else, you should just say it." I held his gaze for a moment. "Would it make you feel better if I was?" The question caught him off guard. For the first time in weeks, he didn't have an answer ready. Have you ever seen someone realize the game they started might not end the way they expected? Daniel looked away first. "Eventually, the truth comes out," he said again quietly. But by then, the truth was already moving quietly beneath the surface. 3 days before Christmas, I packed the last small bag. Nothing obvious. Just a few clothes, important papers, and a photo album from before my marriage. Daniel was asleep upstairs. The house was silent except for the soft ticking of the hallway clock. I stood in the living room for a long moment, looking around the place we had once built together. And strangely, I didn't feel anger. Just clarity, because the plan had already been set in motion weeks ago. All that remained now was the final step. I left 2 days before Christmas. Early in the morning. The sky outside was still dark, the kind of quiet winter darkness that makes the world feel paused. Snow had fallen lightly overnight, covering the street in a soft white layer. Daniel was still asleep upstairs. For a moment I stood in the hallway listening to the silence of the house. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. The heater clicked on softly. Everything felt ordinary. But something inside me knew this was the last time I would stand there. Have you ever walked away from a life you once believed would last forever? I picked up my bag and stepped outside. Cold air rushed against my face as I closed the door quietly behind me. No note. No message. No explanation. Just absence. By the time Daniel woke up that morning, I was already gone. The phone calls started around noon. First one call. Then another. Then 5 in a row. I watched the screen light up from the small apartment across town. Daniel's name flashing again and again. I didn't answer. Then came the texts. Where are you? Are you at work? We need to talk. A few hours later, the tone changed. Are you with him? Have you ever noticed how quickly panic replaces confidence when someone loses control of the situation? For weeks, he had believed he was the one exposing my secret. Now he was the one searching for answers. By Christmas Eve, the messages had become frantic. Voicemails. More texts. Even emails. Still, I stayed silent. Because the truth was something he would discover on his own. And on Christmas morning, that discovery finally happened. Christmas morning was quiet in my new apartment. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting soft golden lines across the floor. Outside, the neighborhood was peaceful. Somewhere down the street, children laughed as they opened presents. My phone sat on the table beside me. Dozens of missed calls. Messages from Daniel. Messages from his parents. Even a few from mutual friends asking if everything was okay. I still hadn't responded. Have you ever noticed how silence can become the loudest answer of all? Around 10 that morning, another message appeared. This time it wasn't frantic. It was short. We planned this. I read the words slowly. For weeks, Daniel had believed he was the clever one, the one uncovering a secret, the one watching, accusing, waiting for me to slip. But he never understood what was actually happening. I hadn't been cheating. I had been leaving. Quietly, carefully, long before he ever noticed anything had changed. The accounts were already separated, important documents secured, my new apartment arranged, even the legal paperwork had been prepared weeks earlier. Every step had been taken calmly. Because once trust disappears from a marriage, the rest of the structure quietly begins to fall apart. Another message appeared. Was there ever someone else? For the first time since I left, I finally replied. 3 simple words. No, there wasn't. Several minutes passed before his response arrived. So you let me believe it? I looked out the window at the snowy street before answering. Yes. Because sometimes the clearest way to reveal the truth is to let someone expose themselves. Daniel had spent months believing he was smarter than me, believing he could cheat without consequences, believing he controlled the story. But the moment I stopped playing the role he expected, everything changed. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. Simply walked away. And sometimes that is the most powerful move a person can make. If you were in my situation, what would you have done? Comment below.